Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out this monogreen landfall aggro deck that's capable of winning the game as early as turn 3 thanks to its commander Tifa Lockhart, a 2-mana 1/2 with trample, and the landfall simply doubles its power until end of turn. A pretty simple effect, but incredibly powerful, especially when you pair Tifa with other pump spells and fetch lands to enable a landfall several times in one turn. So then taking a look at our deck breakdown, I've split things up into a few different categories, starting with the ramp section, which has both early accelerants, so we can maybe play Tifa with protection on turn 2 already, as well as ways to put additional lands onto the battlefield, which in turn can also trigger a landfall several times in one turn. Then we've got more effects to play additional lands each turn, so we can enable landfall more than once each turn, as well as ways to replay lands out of the graveyard, which synergize exceptionally well with all the fetch lands in the deck. Then we've got some additional landfall payoffs, either ways to enhance Tifa or other creatures that can maybe win the game by themselves, as well as more landfall cards that can help us generate additional mana. Then we've got our pump spells, which are either defensive by giving Tifa hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, so we can protect against opposing interaction, as well as some more proactive pump spells that we often want to cast before playing our lands for the turn, so we get the doubling effect after applying our additional power and toughness. And then finally, the miscellaneous section has a little bit of removal and other ways to interact with the opponent's game plan. And then of course can't forget to mention the fetch lands once again, which are also essential for the deck's game plan. So now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, we've got a couple Mox in here with Chrome Mox and Mox Amber. Once we deploy our 2-mana legendary commander, a few other legendary creatures throughout. Then we've got our Boreal Grazer, which can immediately put an extra land in play. Could also play the Kami if you want to play alchemy cards. We've got Birds of Paradise, Delighted Halfling, Elvish Mystic, and Lenor Elves as your more traditional mana creatures, as well as Utopia Sprawl, Enchanting a Forest to make additional green mana. We also have Enter the Unknown, which lets us explore as well as play an additional land this turn, so that can also be a cheap way to give Tifa an extra counter or maybe trigger a landfall twice. And then Explore can also play an extra land as well as drawing a card. There's Into the North and the Rampant Growth. That's also why we have Snow-Covered Forests in the mana base. And then a bit more ramp with Arcane Signet, and the Emerald Medallion discounting green spells can also help us double spell more effectively. And then at 3 mana we've got Entish Restoration, Harrow, Roiling Regrowth, and Springbloom Druid, all pretty similar, as a way to sacrifice a land and put 2 or sometimes 3 lands onto the battlefield. And then a Flare of Cultivation, also quite good if we can maybe sacrifice a 1-mana creature to cast it for free. And then finally Scapeshift can also trigger landfall a whole bunch, and then we'll often want to get the new Capenna fetch lands, since those will automatically sacrifice themselves, looking at Riveteer's Overlook as well as the Cabaretti Courtyard, so we can enable landfall twice more. Then we take a look at our extra land effects, including Azusa, which lets us play 2 additional lands each turn. Dryad lets us play 1. There's Loot as well, which can also activate for 6 mana, finding additional creatures. And then the Wayward Swordtooth, a 5/5 with a City's Blessing. And Oracle of Moldiah can also help play lands off the top. And then we've got ways to replay lands out of the graveyard with Ramunap Excavator, the original Crucible of Worlds, as well as Conduit of Worlds, which can also maybe replay a permanent out of the graveyard. And then Ancient Green Warden is a way to both replay lands out of the graveyard as well as double all our landfall triggers, so it's also quite synergistic. And the Walk-in Closet, a 3-mana enchantment crucible that can also unlock the Forgotten Cellar to maybe access some cards out of the graveyard should the game drag out. Then our landfall payoffs include Saz Chocobo at 1 mana. There's a few equipment as well. The Skyclave Pickaxe can immediately attach to Tifa, giving +2/+2 for every landfall trigger, so that way we first get +2/+2 and then the doubling effect from Tifa if we stack those correctly. Same with the Adventuring Gear, 1 to play, 1 to equip. And then there's a lot of 2-drops that can give us additional +1 counters with landfall. There's a Bristly Bill and the Scythe Cat Cub in creature form, and a Ride the Shupuff and a Roaring Earth in enchantment form. Also make sure to resolve the +1 counters before doubling with Tifa. And then the Mossborn Hydra is another win condition that can easily win the game by itself if it goes uncontested. And then we've got a few more ways to generate additional mana with a landfall, starting with a Lotus Cobra. Then there's Nissa, Resurgent Animist, which can also find additional elves or elementals. And Tireless Provisioner can make treasure tokens each time. Then the Traveling Chocobo can just double all our landfall triggers, don't have to play it in a bird deck for it to be effective, and Courser of Criosphinx can play lands off the top and gain life with landfall as well. And then our instant speed protection spells include Blossoming Defense, giving +2/+2 and hexproof until end of turn. The slightly weaker Ranger's Guile is just +1/+1. Then Royal Treatment leaves us with a Royal Roll token, so that's 1 additional power and ward 1. And we've got Snakeskin Veil giving a +1/+1 counter. So just giving Tifa 1 extra power as a permanent bonus is already quite useful, since that basically saves us an extra landfall doubling effect, as we already start out at 2. Then there's Overprotect, which can both be used as an initial pump spell or as a protection spell. And then at Tyvar's Stand, we can also maybe sink some additional mana into, but can always cast it for X=0 for just hexproof and indestructible. And then our classic pump spells include Audacity as an aura, giving 2 extra power and trample, which of course is a bit redundant, but still when our creature dies we also get to draw a card. And then we've got the classics Giant Growth and Titanic Growth. Then Groundswell, also incredibly synergistic, as we can play a land in response to Tifa's landfall trigger, cast Groundswell, still get the +4/+4, and then start doubling. Scale Up, also very powerful, getting to base power and toughness 6/4, and then we can start doubling with landfall. And then Become Immense, giving +6/+6, using the Delve mechanics, another good use of our fetch lands to fill the graveyard. And then the miscellaneous section has a few removal spells. One of them is Blizzard Brawl, another reason to include those snow-covered forests. Ram Through can also be quite powerful, since Tifa has built-in trample, so it can deal damage directly to the opponent. There's Archdruid's Charm, which has a lot of different modes, including finding extra lands. Can maybe once again get the new Capenna lands, which can trigger right away, so we get 2 landfall triggers at once. Can also use it for a +1 counter and an extra removal spell, or can blow up artifacts and enchantments. And then Force of Vigor can be cast for free and deal with opposing artifacts and enchantments as well. And then the mana base has a lot of forests. We've got Boseiju to answer artifacts and enchantments, and then as many fetch lands as we can fit into the deck. Cavern of Souls can also make Tifa uncounterable against blue decks. And then, as I've mentioned, a lot of fetch lands. I'm avoiding the ones that cost mana to activate, but all the ones that are free are good to go. Could even fit in even more, like Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, but these are slightly better. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Pantlaza. Could be either a dinosaur deck or some sort of Cascade combo deck. In which case, they may not have a lot of cheap interaction if they need to have all their cards be a certain mana value. This hand is basically just missing a fetch land, or maybe some cheaper mana acceleration. Got some powerful pump spells. But yeah, Groundswell without the fetch land is not quite as good. Otherwise we have to wait until we Restoration and then Groundswell, which I guess we could still set up here. Yeah, maybe we'll try it. Because yeah, ideally we respond to the landfall trigger from Tifa with a Groundswell, so we get to increase power before doubling several times. Although if we want to both Groundswell and Restoration, we'll need 4 mana total, since we have our lands enter tapped with Restoration, unlike some of the other effects. So our opponent's got 2 mana and Farseek. So might be more of a normal dinosaur ramp deck. So then the question is, do we still want to play Tifa on 2, or do we maybe wait to protect her? Not that we have any protection effects. We'll just be playing a Roaring Earth. But maybe that's okay. Roaring Earth on 2, we've got a window to maybe draw a 1 mana protection effect. Small chance Groundswell is enough. And then we needed 4 mana to set up Restoration plus Groundswell anyway. Alright, now Hulking Raptor gives the opponent extra mana, and so does Mox Amber. So I guess there was a chance that playing Tifa last turn could have also gotten there. But now we just play forests and hope to survive until next turn. I guess there was no strong argument for playing the Mox Amber already. Alright, if our opponent taps out and doesn't find removal, I'm happy. They found a Shepherd. That's fine. So this looking like a more traditional dinosaur deck. So no infinite combos. They do still have some mana available here. Have to be careful not to run into a lightning bolt. Opponent taps out. Alright, so the coast seems clear. Now Verdant, I guess, adds another twist. Could give them access to white mana, since they haven't fetched up Temple Garden yet. And white mana means removal, but we'll still give it a shot. Alright, so what's the best sequence here? So I guess I play a land in response to the Tifa trigger. And we groundswell, since we've enabled landfall. And then now I can restoration. And getting 3 lands as opposed to 2. So that's a bunch more triggers on the stack. First resolve Roaring Earth and then all the Tifa triggers. And I think this is the optimal sequencing for this turn. 160 damage. And that works, awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Unesh, mono blue Sphinx deck. Our hand is just missing a fetch land to go off with Azusa. And I guess we're still missing a way to replay lands from the graveyard as well. So this hand has a few issues. Yeah, maybe this isn't quite good enough. We have the early ramp, but into nothing substantial. This seems a bit better. Got multiple fetch lands, giant growth and restoration, so we can do some damage. Opponent's gonna look for cheap counter spells most likely, but we can potentially replay Tifa a second time. If they're running auras to shut down our commander's abilities, we're gonna have a harder time. I'm gonna go for Foothills to have it enter untapped next turn. Alright, so can play Tifa. Hope it resolves. They might have found a wash away. Subtlety instead. Well, at least they had to 2-for-1 themselves. And then I guess we'll put it in the library, which means I cannot fetch with Fabled Passage. And we know we're not drawing a land here. So I think I just go for Medallion. And then I'm probably fetching with Passage end of turn. Easier to redeploy Tifa when she gets a 1-mana discount. But yeah, our opponent's keeping up counter spells for days. Flare's pretty good with the Grazer. So can start with Tifa. And yeah, opponent's got the mana drain. Back to the command zone. Can play Sawtooth and then Flare sacking Grazer. Seems fine. Could have also, I suppose, just recast Tifa after flaring, since we end up with another untapped forest. Yeah, might have been better. Since we don't have a way to replay lands from graveyard. Now Anvil, we'll see what it is gonna discount, if it's creatures or instants. Looks like creatures, so Unesh now costs 4. Alright, let's try this again. That resolves. Probably keep land in hand. And then next turn we can try and go for it. Possible they have a bounce spell. But now we have a protection spell as well. So yeah. Hopefully this works out. Play lands. And then Restoration, see if that resolves. Three more landfall triggers. And we've got the City's Blessing. And yeah, looks like our opponent did have a bounce spell or a way to phase Tifa out. So we'll see if Royal Treatment is good enough or if they have yet another counter spell. Swan Song to counter, wow. Alright, so our opponent phased out Tifa. We get a Swan. Now they can tap out for Unesh, so now the shields are down. And let's see here. Our opponent gets to choose which pile they get. So probably don't want to give them the manipulation. Although how relevant is manipulation when they're just hitting for 4? We'll try this. Opponent took the double Sphinx pile, makes sense. And then Harvester, also a Sphinx, because it's a shapeshifter. Well, probably don't want to give them the Pact. Although currently they cannot pay for it. Automaton is another free Sphinx that they can cast, thanks to the Anvil. So our opponent took the free Sphinx. And then now... Unable to Scream would be pretty annoying. Although they cannot cast it on Tifa at the moment, at least. We untap, and Excavator was a good draw. Can replay fetch lands. And we get an extra land from Swordtooth as well. So we get to double a few times. Yeah, that was a lucky top deck, because our opponent was going off here. GG's, get to double twice more, and that's lethal. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Extus, so Mardu, token sacrifice, most likely. What do we think of this hand? We've got loot to play extra lands, nothing to replay lands out of the graveyard, however, which is what we really want to combine with loot. And just a 1 protection spell, and then a lot of fetch lands, which usually we want, but we also want some lands to enter untapped. So overall, I think this is a mulligan. And this is a bit better. A little bit light on the landfall effects, perhaps. But at least with birds and Signet, it's not too difficult to replay Tifa if they remove it. So their opponent's going to make lots of small creatures that they want to sacrifice, and then use those to their advantage. For now, Bitter Triumph takes care of the bird. So instead of playing Tifa and going shields down, we can just play Arcane Signet. And then next turn play Tifa with Blossoming Defense as backup. There are still removal spells that can get around Hexproof, thinking of Edict effects like Shieldred's Edict. Now the Provisioner's an interesting twist. Could play that to make some more treasures in the meantime. But yeah, I think we try Tifa. And then I think we save the fetch lands for now. Sadly cannot tap out for Roaring Earth. Otherwise we go shields down. Get Lost we can potentially beat. Does mean we miss out on the map tokens now that the spell fizzles. And then now we're looking at probably Roaring Earth into a fetch land as opposed to going for Provisioner. Can make it Kabarati Courtyard, or we can still play the Provisioner And then, oops, I meant to fetch in response to the landfall trigger. So we first get the extra counter and then double again. Either way, it's not going to be lethal here, but it would have been a little bit more damage. Alright, so we'll hit for 10, see what Terra response is, if any. And then I think we're okay playing Provisioner. So next turn, if they sack 2 things, they could cast Awaken the Blood Avatar already. And then sacrifice a creature of my choice, so I can make it a Provisioner. Ooh, opponent had a Mana Tithe, that's brutal. So now they do get to tap out for Awaken the Blood Avatar, I lose Tifa. And yeah, it's gonna be a while before we're attacking for lethal again. So yeah, the sequence of counter your creature into Awaken is pretty brutal. So back to the command zone. This is a pretty fast clock as well. So we can play Tifa, and then just Rampant Growth, accumulate some counters, and then still have a Courtyard left for next turn. So yeah, if they once again have removal, that's not ideal, but at least we're developing our mana while pumping Tifa, so it's easier to redeploy. Three cards in hand. I guess they can Awaken the Blood Avatar. Well, I guess now it's 2 more mana because of the commander attacks. So their opponent's going digging here to find some cheaper removal. Did they find it? A Ragavan, that's fine. And yeah, opponent has to pass it back. Now let's make sure to stack those triggers correctly. First Roaring Earth, then double, and then we still had a Roiling Regrowth. Make sure to resolve the +1 counters first, and then double as many times as possible, and that's certainly good enough here. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Vivi, and our deck does not have lots of removal, so this is going to be a tough matchup, especially with our opponent on the play. Still, I think we have a keeper, missing a fetch land to go with a walk-in closet. But we've got a few looks here with Enter the Unknown as well, so we'll try. And if they remove Tifa once or twice, we have the tools to replay her. Now with the Druid, we can also get a land in the graveyard at least. Springleaf Drum also makes sense with Vivi, so you can immediately cast another spell and start racking up those counters. Overprotect, interesting too. So what makes the most sense? Maybe just play Emerald Medallion. Although they're maybe more likely to be able to destroy artifacts than mess with our lands. But discounting Into the North seems worth it. Alright, so opponent can suit up Vivi with the boots if they're scared of removal. Or they can keep up what I presume to be something like a wash away. So then we don't need to prioritize playing Tifa right now. Although I could go Tifa, keep up Overprotect. So we have some options. Yeah, maybe start with a Signet. See if that resolves. Then we can try Tifa. Opponent's got to counter. Serenades at least leaves us with a bird. Back to the command zone, and then we may as well Into the North to keep developing our mana. Alright, so next turn we can redeploy a 3 mana Tifa pretty easily. But we'll see if Vivi can go off in the meantime. Opponent considers. Surprised they immediately used Vivi for mana, as opposed to maybe waiting. Suit up Vivi with the boots. Alright, take 2. So 2 cards in hand, 2 mana available thanks to the Springleaf Drum. And now we've got a Royal Treatment for protection as well. So I do need to keep up a protection spell, which means I don't get to do much else here. Suppose I could enter the unknown, but if I hit a land, do I even want to play it? Probably not. So we've got 2 ways to protect Tifa available. And yeah, next turn we've got a good chance of presenting lethal. Opponent had a Fading Hope. That's fine, I can just replay Tifa for 1 mana. So they probably should have waited until end of turn. But then we probably would have gone for the royal treatment. There's an argument for casting the treatment as opposed to letting them bounce Tifa, so we fizzle the Fading Hope and they don't get to scry, plus we end up with a slightly larger Tifa. Opponent's gonna expedite, end of turn, sure. So Vivi's getting large. Can they find some expensive card draw spell here to make use of it? Yeah, they sure can commit. So we'll try this. That works. I don't think they'll have enough mana to cast a Memory Half, unless they go land and they tap out. I kind of like my hand, but if we get to draw 7, we could find an even better one. And get to untap, find another protection effect. Alright, so now it's all about just triggering landfall a bunch. Could start with an Overprotect, since we have Snakeskin Veil as well, and our opponent's only got to 1 card to work with. So we pump up Tifa before we trigger landfall. And they had another interactive spell here. Yeah. So that worked out. And our opponent explodes. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Rhys the Redeemed, so green-white tokens. Our hand is fine. Could wait to play Tifa until we have Snakeskin Veil backup, not that I expect a ton of removal out of the tokens deck. And even if they remove Tifa here, between the extra mana we get from Nissa, it shouldn't be too difficult to redeploy. Their opponent runs out their commander, still has a white mana up. Could be Mana Tithe or maybe some Convoke card. So let's say we play the Pickaxe, then we can play a fetch land and still have Veil backup. Yeah, that seems fine. Opponent had a Nature's Claim. Cannot protect that with Snakeskin Veil. So yeah, that works. So that's too bad. I guess I can maybe hang on to the fetch land now. Sure. And just hit for 2. And then next turn, probably looking at Nissa. And then if we go Nissa into a fetch land, there's no real window where they can target Tifa where we don't have Snakeskin Veil up. And so yeah, case of the Gateway Express, would have been able to take out Tifa if it weren't for this Snakeskin Veil. The extra +1 counter is also useful, so we have a bit more power to start out. And then if I go for Windswept Heath, I can still play Courser or maybe some elf we find off Nissa's ability. A Mossborn Hydra, I guess, is another win condition. Hit you for 8. Yeah, if we still had the equipment, this would have been a lethal attack for sure. Stacking the +2 power before we double. So we'll see. Does our opponent have more interaction? There's 2 creatures they need to deal with. Well, 3 creatures, but 2 that can actively kill them. And Rhys gets in for 1. And split up, wow, so they got rid of most of my stuff. So next up we can go Signet into Courser. And then don't think I need to keep the Flare of Cultivation necessarily. We'll get in for another 8. And now Swordtooth, a little bit more exciting, especially if we find an effect to replay lands out of the graveyard. But our opponent scoops it up, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Terra, so could be a 5-color deck thanks to the backside. And what do we think of our hands? Lots of ways to play additional lands, but nothing to replay lands out of the graveyard. So this one's not all that exciting. Alright, this one's maybe a bit better. We have a bit of interaction with Force of Vigor, as well as Blizzard Brawl. Question is, do we tap out for Tifa on turn 2? Yeah, I think we still try it, since the only instant speed interaction we have is Giant Growth, which is probably not going to be good enough to beat whatever removal spell they have. Opponent gets a Tri-land. Every color but red and green, but now Stomping Ground into Momentum Breaker. So yeah, goodbye Tifa. And we don't have the best tools to redeploy her, since we don't have any mana acceleration. So I guess we'll play Courser now. And hope it can stick around for a while. Ram through coming up. Opponent has a Black Market Connections, so we could Force of Vigor both the Connections and the Momentum Breaker. Sure. And then get rid of maybe a Blizzard Brawl. Opponent's not presenting many creatures. Alright, so no lands next. I guess we enter the Unknown just to dig a card deeper. And then there might be a land next. Still nothing. Okay, do I Audacity on Courser? I don't think I'm quite there yet. Enchantress's Presence is next. Also would have been fun to blow up. Can we get a land? We can. So then I probably go for Tifa as opposed to playing the Roaring Earth first. And then loot can also help us play additional lands, hopefully off the top with Courser. But yeah, they could easily have more answers for Tifa. Right, opponent's just gonna take out Tifa right now. So now it costs 6 mana. And a land on top, that's useful. So we'll probably play the Roaring Earth now. And then I can still play loot as well. Fine to shuffle away Utopia Sprawl. Another land on top that we get to play. And yeah, let's just Audacity smash for 8. And now Courser's lethal next turn. Got the Chocobo coming up. And Ram Through now also deals damage if we combine it with Audacity. Terra mills a bunch of enchantments as well as Farewell, but it's our opponent saying farewell to us here. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Rigo, so a banned small creature deck. What do we think of our hand? It's a bit land light. Yeah, I don't think this is quite gonna get there. This one's got a fetch lands, Swordtooth, protection, so all we're missing is something to maybe replay lands out of the graveyard. but a promising start. Turn 2, play Tifa with protection backup. And yeah, I think I'll just play the forest here, even though if I play Verdant, there's a chance I draw another fetch land, so we can maximize those triggers next turn. Alright, they might have a wash away. Fair enough. So, no Tifa, back to the command zone. Could try again next turn, although then we would be shields down on Tyvar's stand. They just have a single blue up, so has to be another very specific counterspell. Or maybe next turn if they have an aura to shut down Tifa, that could be bad. The alternative is Sawtooth and pass. I think I try Tifa again. Opponent just brainstorming a response. So they get to dig pretty deep for an answer. And yeah, depending on that answer, we could be in trouble. If not, next turn we should comfortably present lethal. Alright, so I guess a counter spell could still get scale up, but now we have multiple protection spells. That works. Audacity. Play fetch lands up to 16. Can make it 32. And Fading Hope we can stop with a Ranger's Guile. And wow, it looks like they had another effect here, March of Swirling Mists, to phase out our creature. Well, good thing we had another protection spell at the ready. And get to attack, fetch, and that's lethal. Wow, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Tsagan, so a Mardu, start your engines deck. So, First Strike and Death Touch, or Double Strike and Death Touch, are going to be a problem if they get to max speed. So we do need to have a pretty fast hand, but at the same time Mardu is also going to have access to a lot of removal. This hand has some mana acceleration and protection, although we might run out of steam pretty quickly, since we don't have a way to replay fetch lands out of the graveyard. So then we might struggle to get Tifa large enough. Yeah, this one's close. I think I mulligan. This is a little bit better. Could Crow Mox Tifa on turn 1. And then turn 2 we have a Roiling Regrowth at the very least. Now Harrow's upgrade over it. Yeah, I think that's worth it over any alternative. Could also wait to play Tifa with Tyvar's stand backup. And then I think I keep the Green Warden as a late game play. So we get to play Tifa. Hopefully she survives. If not, ramp into Green Warden to try and take over with our fetch land. So our opponent's gonna surveil. And do they have removal? Well, they're not going for it yet. So maybe get to keep up Tyvar's stand. For now, it's gonna be just play a land, attack, and then plan to Harrow. If they use removal now, while the trigger's still on the stack, I could maybe pump Tifa with Tyvar's stand in response. And then we get even more damage in. So our opponent's gonna let the trigger resolve. We'll attack. Yeah, I could just get in for 2. Harrow would make it 8 damage. I mean, I'm gonna Harrow anyways, so may as well do it now. I don't think the 2 damage versus no damage really matters. Alright, so our opponent had removal all along. A bit risky to let us untap, but that's alright. So next turn I can play Tifa with either stand or Ranger Skyle backup. As our opponent plays an Archon, that's relevant. Can cast more than one spell each turn. Well, still going for Tifa, and then next turn with Scale Up we can maybe do some damage with a fetch land. Even though it enters tapped, it still gets sacrificed, which is all that matters. Opponent's plays Tsagan, gets speed up to 2. We'll take our turn. Yeah, none of these add a +1 counter to my creature, otherwise it maybe would have been worth it. And then step 1 Scale Up, step 2 play fetch land. Up to 12, up to 24, so opponent's not dead yet, but they have to jump. And if it weren't for Archon with Tyvar Stand, we would have had lethal. And our opponent explodes, I'll take it. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Kaya, black-white, kind of a tokeny deck. And yeah. Got a decent hand. Turn 1 Utopia Sprawl goes a long way. But our opponent's got the Thoughtseize to have a look. So they have perfect information. Taking either Oracle or Utopia Sprawl, goes for the Sprawl. Alright, let's get Fabled Passage out of the way. Turn 2 Birth and get a Plains. We're fine to fetch. Don't expect Tifa to survive if we tap out for her on turn 2. But it's not like I can really protect her for 1 mana if I wait a turn, so I would have to wait at least 2 turns. At which point we can just replay her for 4 mana. Got a few other creatures that are also nice if they stick around. Timurid Calls the Dead is gonna start making zombies. Did not. Alright, we get to untap. And do we have lethal here? With an untapped fetch land, I get to play my land in response to the landfall trigger, cast Groundswell, that's +4 up to 5 power. And then I can still, with the first landfall trigger on the stack, fetch, get another land, second landfall trigger on the stack, in response overprotect. And then we go up to 8 power, double to 16, double to 32. And yeah, that should be good enough. That resolves. Now fetch. Get a land. In response to the landfall, overprotect. 8, 16, 32, -4 is well over 20 damage. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Vivi once again. What do we think of our opener? No fetch land to go with Excavator. 1 protection spell. This one's pretty mediocre. This one's a bit more exciting. So I get to play Tifa with Tyvar Stand backup. And then we've got a few options thereafter. Opponent does have a blue mana up, so could see a counter spell. Should probably play the Mox Amber first in case they have a bounce spell for Tifa, then I'll already have that extra mana available. Could honestly also play Bristly Bill, which also enables Mox Amber, but Tifa is the one that can actually win the game. Upside of Bill is that it doesn't get countered by Wash Away, if that's the counterspell they have, but it's going to be a Strix Serenade instead. So back to the command zone. Yeah, Serenade has definitely picked up in popularity as of late as another 1-mana answer to commanders, since it can hit both creatures and planeswalkers. Okay, so next can play Bill, and then save my Provisioner until I can enable Landfall right away. So now Mox Amber is online. Opponent had a Virtue of Courage. Yeah, seems worth protecting. Can cast it for X = 0 here. And then the adventure also fizzles thanks to hexproof, so they don't get to keep the 5 mana enchantment half of it. So a lot of early interaction, but we're still on the board. Question is, do we try Tifa next turn? Do we go for Provisioner first? Immolation, good enough to take care of Bill, so now I regret not giving it an extra +1 counter. And a Medallion. So I think we go Provisioner plus Vista. Although they do still have double blue up, so they could have some other counterspell here. So then maybe we give them the Medallion and play it a little bit more patiently. Yeah, I would hate to get my Provisioner countered by a mana drain. And Medallion's still good if it resolves. So yeah, I could play Provisioner, but then I miss out on all the treasures, so we'll be patient. Opponent mostly taps out for Vivi, still blue and red mana up. Goes for an opt. Alright, so they will be shields down in my turn at least. So we can try to get the most out of our cards. Start with Provisioner, play a land, fetch, versus play Tifa, which enables the Mox Amber. Now that doesn't seem as good. And then the Green Warden, also a way to replay the fetch lands out of the graveyard. What I do not have is another protection spell. So Tifa's somewhat likely to die here. But if I get to keep the Provisioner alive and resolve the Green Warden, that's maybe not a disaster. Unable to Scream, now gonna permanently shut down our commander. So yeah, we need to come up with an alternative game plan. Yeah, don't really have any way to increase power and toughness with landfall at the moment, so that's kind of what we were hoping for. Do have a couple disenchants in the deck, Boseiju, Archduke's Charm. Opponent's gonna take an extra turn here. So yeah, things aren't really going to plan. If they attack, I'm happy to block with Tifa, so we can at least send her back to the command zone. Opponent looking at the graveyard cannot be good for me. Maybe a Mizzix Mastery, replay your Time Warp once again. Yep. And they were able to cast it with Overload, so they get to replay all their instants and sorceries. Which means Time Warp and Opt, so could have been worse, but still not happy about it. As we fall to 18, and our opponent's got a lot of extra looks at either interaction or more card draw. They did bottom with the Opt at least. And I may as well chump, since I may not get the chance next turn. So now with 3 cards in hand. Access to 12 mana, at the very least. Goes for a Duplimancy. Okay. Anything else? Stab Between Worlds, so I guess we get rid of our hands. Not a bad one. But now our opponent has had an opportunity to find more spells as well, including counter spells. Don't know if they played a land yet. They could cast another Time Warp effect, which at this point is probably game over. Alright, I'll take 8. Alright, found the Archduke's Charm as it turns out. Now, what's the best I can do? A Roaring Earth and Bristly Bill for starters. And see where we end up. Bill enables Mox Amber. Our opponent's got a response, Stern Scolding. Yep. So then I can play my land out. And grow the bird. Could also make food with a provisioner. Any chance I can present lethal here with just a Roaring Earth? So 7, 8, 9, 10. We're getting close, but I don't think we quite have enough. And also won't have enough to take out Vivi. But we can maybe chump Vivi. So I'm still going treasure. Play Dryad. Play another land. Play Druid. I guess with Archdruid's Charm I can also get one of the fetch lands that immediately sacrifices itself. Which would be 2 more landfall triggers. So we're getting up there. So for now, I'll still go for treasure, but I'll make 1 food as well. And then go to attackers. And then, yeah, let's try and go for it. And get a land. That will immediately sacrifice itself. Ooh, opponent tails and counters a trigger. So where does that leave us? 11 damage. And then I can either play Mystic or sack the food. I guess we'll sack the food now and pass. Although, yeah, what's more likely, our opponent casting 6 spells, or let's say 3 spells and a burn spell, versus having 2 removal spells? I guess the removal's more likely. Alright, let's see if we're dead. Something like a River's Rebuke would make it easy. Alright, wow, we got there. Super close game here. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing a mirror match here with another Tifa. So it's all about speed and not so much the protection effects. Bump spells are still good. This hand is borderline. We're on the draw with no 1-mana ramp. So we're kind of at the mercy of our opponent. Could mulligan and look for something a little faster. How does this hand play out if we were to just curve out normally? Turn 2 could already play Tifa, and then on the following turn, yeah, it's not even all that exciting. So I think we mulligan. This one's not really an improvement. Tifa into Excavator without a fetch land. And the lands from Regrowth also enter tapped, so no opportunity to Giant Growth in response to the landfall trigger. Alright, this is probably our best shot. And I don't think I need Tyvar's stand unless our opponent's packing some fight effects. But yeah, we're probably dead here since we're on the draw. Opponent's got a Gilded Goose as another 1-mana accelerant. So what we're still missing is a pump spell. Just triggering landfall a bunch may not be enough. Opponent's forced to use the Goose to cast Tifa, and the Halfling shows up a turn late. Yeah, I may as well just play Tifa here. Our opponent was able to save the fetch land for next turn. So yeah, depending on the pump spell, that could be good, but nope, opponent fetches end of turn. So we'll see what they can do with 3 mana. Could certainly be dead. No attacks, interesting. Okay, well, can we do something on the way back? I can Restoration, but it's not lethal. So maybe we just go halfling plus Into the North and gear up for next turn. Let's start with Into the North. Could also play Nissa, I suppose, which adds a little bit more mana next turn. Yeah, I guess Nissa is reasonable too. And then I don't think I attack in case our opponent has a defensive bump spell. They would be able to eat Tifa. Opponent just making a food. So if they draw land, they could have access to 4 mana. It's going to be a Lotus Cobra for starters, but no line drop. Okay, what's the best we can do now? Start with Fabled Passage. Don't have a pump spell, so there's no responding to the landfall triggers. Could also run out the Green Warden to double landfall going forward. Alright, so if I Restoration now, we get 3 more landfall triggers, so 8, 16, 32, that should be enough. And then we could also keep going with Into the North. So unless there's some instant speed interactions that I'm not aware of, this is game, and we got there. So yeah, opponent was on the play, but maybe kept a slightly sketchier hand that didn't quite pan out. So we got to see this monogreen Tifa landfall deck in action, and yeah, this deck does not mess around, can win as early as turn 3, which is quite the accomplishment in Brawl, so probably deserves to be in the hell queue, although I feel like I keep saying that with almost every new Brawl deck I cover, so it feels like the hell queue is getting quite crowded. So yeah, we'll see how it actually shakes out. Maybe after the next update the ranks will be adjusted and the matchmaking will be a little bit more sane. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.